I'd like to bring to our conversation Jake Sherman, founder of Punchbowl News and an MSNBC political contributor. Jake, you're up there on the Hill. You got all the clatter and noise around you. Give us a take of what you're hearing. What's the latest that you're picking up on the Hill?
Well, I'm also not Denver Riggleman, and I'm also not Sam Stein. So I apologize.
No, you're not.
I apologize, or Donna Edwards for that matter. I apologize for all those things. Listen, I think of a few things. There's a lot to unpack here. Number one, if McCarthy wanted a committee, and I've said this to him, I've said this in press conferences, if he wanted a committee that he had a say on, he could have worked to create this committee that the Senate rejected that he had a say on. Meaning, the real way, let's take the most cynical point of view, which may or may not be true. I'll let you guys decide that Republicans are going to just strictly run interference for Donald Trump. A lot of people would say that. They had the opportunity to do that because they had veto power over subpoenas on that committee that Nancy Pelosi had tried to pass, that passed through the House and got stopped in the Senate. So, that would have been a really good way for McCarthy to have control. Republicans got rid of that. Banks and Jordan, I mean, listen, I have no idea whether this will lead to a more productive committee or not. Republicans have said they want to discover why the Capitol was not well protected on that day. Of course, the National Guard is mostly in the purview of the President of the United States. So that's one thing to chew over. I do think, though, that Pelosi is going to, I would have to imagine, is going to try to put another Republican on this panel. The only other Republican who would be willing, I have to imagine, is Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. And listen, I think we wrote this in Punchbowl News this morning. Both Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, Republicans have mostly, if not completely, written them off. Do not think they're going to either run for re-election. If they run, they believe they're going to lose resoundingly. Because as Michael, you and I have talked about so many times on the air, this is a Republican Party that is not interested in people, a Republican electorate that is not interested in people that do not have and that do not express fealty and support and complete support for Donald Trump. Still a party that supports Donald Trump 95 or 90%, depending on the poll. So I think those are the dynamics, and the House has just turned into a food fight. And listen, I'll say this one last thing before I stop rambling here. Kevin McCarthy is driven right now by one dynamic. He believes that he's going to take back the House of Representatives in 2022 based on a wealth of about 100 years of evidence about midterm elections in the first term of a president. We'll have to see if that holds true. He believes that Republicans are only 5 seats away from that. Redistricting helps them, and they believe that there are a lot of Democrats in soft seats that they could knock off. So everything he is trying to do is based on that goal, straight ahead toward Election Day and to win back the House of Representatives. Everything he does is guided by that principle and by that goal.
So Donna, I think Jake kind of lays out the script for Republicans very accurately. And so that means, are the Democrats doing enough right now? They have said that nothing less than our democracy is at stake. What should be, the goal here? What should we be seeing from them right now? Should these committees be hearing, for example, these committee hearings be broadcast at prime time? Make it must-see viewing. Engage the public in a way that they appreciate the narrative that they're trying to create.
Well, look, I think, first of all, I think House Democrats have been standing in the gap for the last 5.5 years through the Trump years and now. And I think that they intend to get to the truth. And, it would be great if these were broadcast during prime time. Obviously, the networks have control over that. But I think people will be watching. They'll be watching in whatever ways they get their news, because I think the American public is interested in getting some of these answers as well. And the testimony beginning next week with the police officers, I think, is going to be very, very compelling for Democrats to be able to present as a starting point of this investigation. And I think there is a way to conduct the committee's inquiry so that when the public does get the final product, they're not going to ask whether it was produced by Democrats or Republicans. They're going to say this was produced by Americans who want to protect democracy. And so I'm actually confident that Americans are going to be tuning in whatever way they get their information to the hearings that are going to start next week.
So, Sam, you may not be Denver Riggleman, but you're still my buddy. You're still my buddy, so I got much love for you, right? We saw during the second impeachment trial, for example, the power of images and the power of stories from 1/6 that played out before our very eyes. What, will it take to really grip the American people with this investigation? Because I think for a lot of Americans who are interested, they want to get at the truth. But how do the Democrats do that in a way in which it's just politics from Republicans doesn't stain the whole thing?
Honestly, I think it's going to be hard, and maybe I'm in the minority in thinking that. But I think the past couple months have shown that even something as objectively awful as an attack on the Capitol and an attempt to disrupt democratic governance, even that can be distilled through the prism of partisan politics and Trumpism. I mean, what we see now is, I would say, a majority of Republicans have either cast the scrutiny of January 6th aside, come up with explanations for why it's not a big deal, or latched onto conspiracy theories about how this was actually, you could go down various rabbit holes, a plant of Democratic operatives or, FBI informants. So, my optimism about this taking hold of the public is not great. I think where things can get interesting, so to speak, is not so much what it says about Trump, but what it says about the people around him. I mean, the questions we don't know are what was going on inside the White House that day in those moments? What was said on the calls between Trump and elected Republican officials? What were the orders given around the deployment of the National Guard? Those are the holes that we have. And when we fill in those holes, and I assume that's what this commission will do, when we fill in those holes, that's when you start to get questions answered around people like Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan, people high up in the White House, and so on and so forth. So long and short of it is, I'm not totally optimistic this is going to change anyone's perception of Trump. How you feel about Trump is how you feel about Trump. But for people outside of his immediate orbit, it could matter greatly.